I was transferred $115 million to my account. I had never seen that kind of money and called the bank. But the manager said quietly, "Ma'am, we have been waiting for your call. This money has belonged to you for a long time. The sender asked us to pass on." Good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I have always been the kind of woman who checks the price tag twice before putting anything in the grocery cart. Not out of shame, out of habit. 14 years of teaching 8th grade English at Roosevelt Middle School will do that to you. It teaches you to stretch a dollar the way you stretch a metaphor, carefully, with intention, hoping it holds. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 41 years old when my life changed in a way I still struggle to describe without my hands starting to shake. I lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Hawthorne Avenue in Portland, Oregon, a house with a leaky kitchen faucet I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and a backyard that my daughter Lily had turned into a small, chaotic garden of sunflowers and tomatoes. We were not poor. We were not rich. We were fine, and I had made my peace with fine. My ex-husband, Tom, had left when Lily was 6. No dramatic scene, no shouting. Just a Tuesday morning when he said he felt like he was disappearing inside our life, and he needed to go find himself. He found himself in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a dental hygienist named Brooke. He sent child support reliably, I'll give him that. But Lily and I had built something without him, something small and sturdy and ours. I graded papers at the kitchen table most evenings. I made my coffee too strong and drank it out of a chipped mug that said, "World's Okayest Human," a gift from my students. I called my mother on Sundays. I took Lily to her soccer practice on Saturdays. I had a best friend named Megan who worked as a nurse and who made me laugh harder than anyone I'd ever known. That was my life. Predictable, manageable, good enough. The only family complication I'd learned to live with was my cousin Deborah. Deborah Shez, name Mitchell, same as me, though she'd shed the name the moment she married Craig Chase at 24, was technically family. In practice, she was something I could never quite name. She was 3 years older, louder, and had spent most of our childhood letting me know in small surgical ways that I was the lesser version of a Mitchell. When her mother and my father's side of the family had drifted apart after my Uncle Gerald's death, I hadn't mourned the distance. Deborah had called me twice in the past 4 years. Both times, she'd wanted something. Her husband Craig was a man who smiled with his mouth and watched you with his eyes. He worked in commercial real estate and had a handshake that felt like a business transaction. I had never trusted him. I could never tell you exactly why. Some people just give off a frequency you learn not to ignore. So when I say that the morning of March 14th began like any other morning, I mean it literally. I woke at 6:15. I made coffee. I packed Lily's lunch, turkey and Swiss on whole wheat, an apple, a small bag of pretzels. I kissed her on the top of her head as she grabbed her backpack. I watched her walk to the bus stop from the front window, the way I always did. Then I sat down with my phone to check my bank account before leaving for school, and I stopped breathing. The balance on the screen read $115,347,000.00. I put the phone down on the table. I picked it up again. The number had not changed. $115,347,000 in my checking account. The account where, 2 days prior, I had had $4,212.63. My first thought was that something was broken, a glitch, a mistake. Someone else's money routed to the wrong account. Some kind of banking error that would be corrected by noon and leave me embarrassed and shaken. Because that was the only explanation my brain, trained on a teacher's salary and a leaking faucet, could produce. I called the bank. The hold music played for 4 minutes. I counted. Then a man's voice came on the line. Calm, professional, unhurried. First Pacific Bank, this is Richard Holt. How can I help you today? I need to report an error, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. There's been a deposit to my account that I don't recognize. A very large one. I think there's been a mistake. There was a pause. Not a confused pause. Not the pause of someone typing, searching, pulling up records. It was a pause that felt almost like relief. Could I have your name and account number, please? I gave them to him. Another pause. Longer this time. Ms. Mitchell, Richard Holt said, and his voice dropped just slightly, not to a whisper, but to something that felt almost private. We've been expecting your call. This is not an error. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. The funds are legitimate, he continued. They were transferred as directed by the estate of Herbert Allen Mitchell, executed through Callaway and Reed, attorneys at law in Portland. The transfer has cleared full verification. He paused once more. The sender asked that a message be passed along to you when you made contact. The room felt very still. What message? I asked. He said, and I'm quoting from the estate's written instruction, I should have found you sooner. Everything I had was always meant for you. I'm sorry it took me so long. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time after that call ended. The coffee went cold. The clock on the microwave changed from 7:04 to 7:31. I was going to be late for school for the first time in 6 years, and I couldn't make myself care even a little. Herbert Allen Mitchell, my father's uncle, a man I had met exactly twice in my life. Once at a family reunion when I was 9, and once at my father's funeral when I was 26. A quiet man. A man who had said very little but watched everything. A man I had not thought about in years. What had he wanted to tell me? And why had no one, not a lawyer, not a relative, not a single person, told me he had died? I called in sick to work. I had never done that without actually being sick. I sat at that kitchen table until 10 in the morning, and then I moved to the couch, and then I stood in the middle of the living room for a while, not sure what to do with my body. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. The sound of it, so ordinary, so completely indifferent to what had just happened inside my house, struck me as almost funny. $115 million. I said it out loud quietly to the empty room. It didn't sound real. It sounded like a figure from a news story about someone else, about a lottery winner I would read about on my phone and feel a distant, harmless pang of envy for. Not me. Not Sarah Mitchell with the chipped coffee mug and the leaky faucet and the stack of ungraded essays on the kitchen counter. I opened my laptop and typed Herbert Allen Mitchell into the search bar. The first result was an obituary from the Portland Oregonian dated 8 months ago, July 3rd. Herbert Allen Mitchell, 84, of Lake Oswego, Oregon, passed away peacefully at his home after a brief illness. He was a retired civil engineer and founder of Mitchell Land Holdings, LLC. He is survived by no immediate family. Memorial services were private. Mitchell Land Holdings. I typed that in next. What I found made me sit back slowly in my chair. Mitchell Land Holdings was a commercial property company that had operated in the Pacific Northwest for over 40 years. Industrial land, warehouses, a substantial parcel of developable acreage in Clackamas County. The company had been quietly, steadily, extraordinarily profitable. Real estate attorneys who discussed the estate publicly referred to it as a rare, unleveraged portfolio of generational value. He had been worth considerably more than $115 million. The transfer to my account was, apparently, the core of his liquid estate after legal fees, taxes, and the disbursement of smaller charitable bequests. I was his only named heir. How had I not known this man existed in any meaningful way? How had I not known he was sick, that he had died? The obituary had run in July. We were now in March. 8 months had passed, 8 months in which someone, the attorneys at Callaway and Reed, someone in my family, someone, had known this money existed and was coming to me. Why hadn't I been contacted sooner? I picked up the phone and called Callaway and Reed. The receptionist put me through to a junior associate named Davis, who was careful and measured in a way that told me he had been briefed to be careful and measured with me specifically. "Ms. Mitchell, we're very glad you've made contact," he said. "We attempted to reach you on several occasions." "When?" I asked. "How?" "We mailed certified correspondence to the address on record for you, which was listed as 4417 Birchwood Drive, Beaverton. I had not lived at that address in 11 years. That had been my address when I was still married to Tom, in the house we'd rented before the divorce. I had moved to Hawthorne Avenue in 2014. That address is a decade out of date," I said. A pause. "Yes, ma'am. We were working from contact information provided to us by a family member who acted as a point of contact during the estate's initial filing period." I felt something go cold in the center of my chest. "Which family member?" Another pause. Longer. "I'm not able to share that at this time, but I would strongly encourage you to come into our office at your earliest convenience. There are documents that require your signature, and there are matters we should discuss in person." I made the appointment for the following Monday. Then I hung up and sat very still for a long time, staring at my sunflowers through the back window. A family member had given them an outdated address. A family member had been their point of contact. I thought about Deborah. I thought about the way Craig had smiled at my father's funeral, that close-mouthed, assessing smile, while his arm rested around Deborah's shoulders. I thought about how Deborah had called me 18 months ago, out of nowhere, asking if I'd been in touch with any of the Mitchell side lately. I had said no. She had said, "Right, of course, neither have I," and then changed the subject to her kitchen renovation. Had that been a probe? Had she been checking to see if I knew anything? I thought, I don't know enough yet. I need to know more before I do anything. That was when the fear arrived properly. Not the breathless, dizzy fear of seeing the balance. That had been shock. This was different. This was the slow, heavy recognition that something had been done to me deliberately, that there were people in my life who had known and had chosen not to tell me, and that those people were not strangers. They were family. But fear, I have learned, is not the same as paralysis. Fear is just information. I opened a new tab and searched. Estate Attorney, Portland, Oregon. Probate litigation. Inheritance dispute. I needed someone in my corner before I walked into that law office, before I signed anything, before I said anything to anyone, including Deborah. I found Patricia Owens. Her firm's website was spare and professional. Owens and Reyes, estate and probate law. Her photograph showed a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and a composed expression. Her bio mentioned 22 years specializing in contested estates and fiduciary disputes. I called her office that afternoon. "I think someone in my family may have interfered with my inheritance," I told her assistant. I need to speak with an attorney before I meet with the estate's law firm on Monday. I had an appointment with Patricia Owens for Friday morning. I did not call Deborah. I did not mention any of this to Megan yet. I picked Lily up from school that afternoon and made pasta for dinner and helped her with her history homework, and I did not say a single word about any of it because Lily was 14 and this was not hers to carry, and because I had learned, in the years since Tom left, that some things you have to hold alone until you know their shape. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. $115 million. An old man who'd said, "I should have found you sooner," an outdated address, a cousin who always seemed to know which questions not to answer. I was going to find out exactly what had happened, and I was going to be very, very careful about how I did it. Patricia Owens's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, with a view of the Willamette River and a waiting room that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I arrived 10 minutes early on Friday morning in the best blazer I owned, the navy one I wore for parent-teacher conferences, and I sat in one of the low leather chairs and told myself to breathe normally. She came out to meet me herself. That surprised me. She was taller than her photo suggested, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a handshake that was brief and firm and meant it. "Ms. Mitchell, come in." I told her everything I knew, in order. The bank call. Richard Holt's voice dropping to something private. Herbert's message. The obituary. Mitchell Land Holdings. The outdated address. The phrase, "A family member acted as point of contact." Patricia listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I couldn't read from across the desk. When I finished, she set down her pen. "How certain are you," she said, "that you had no contact with any representative of the estate between July and now?" "Certain," I said. "No phone calls, no letters, no emails, nothing." And the address they had on file, 4417 Birchwood Drive. You vacated that property in 2014? Correct. Did you have any formal notification of address change filed with the Postal Service at the time of the move? Yes. I filed a change of address form. My mail forwarding ran for 1 year, as it typically does. After that, I received nothing from that address. She wrote something. "The question," she said carefully, "is who provided that address to Callaway and Reed, and when?" Estate attorneys conducting a beneficiary search are required to make reasonable efforts to locate heirs. If someone actively provided them with false or outdated contact information, that constitutes interference with probate proceedings, potentially fraudulent interference, depending on intent and what that person stood to gain. I felt the room sharpen around me. What would they have stood to gain? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. If you could not be located within the statutory notification period, Patricia said, the estate could potentially be restructured, redirected to other claimants, or held in escrow with different administrative terms. It would depend on the will's provisions. But the short answer is, if you had never come forward, someone else might eventually have had a claim to make. She paused. I'd like to request the full estate file from Callaway and Reed before your meeting with them on Monday. With your authorization, I can accompany you to that meeting. Please, I said. Yes. She leaned forward slightly. Ms. Mitchell, I want to be direct with you. If what you're describing is accurate, this is not a clerical oversight. This is deliberate. And the person who provided that address to the estate attorneys almost certainly knew exactly what they were doing. I drove home in silence. The river had been gray and flat through Patricia's window. Everything felt very clear and very heavy at the same time. On Monday, Patricia and I walked into the offices of Callaway and Reed together. The attorney assigned to Herbert's estate was a man named Gordon Callaway himself, early 60s, silver-haired, with the practiced solemnity of a man accustomed to rooms full of grief and contested money. He seemed surprised to see Patricia. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand, "we're relieved to finally be in touch." "I'd like to understand the timeline of your attempts to reach me," Patricia said before I could answer. "Specifically, I'd like to see documentation of when the beneficiary contact information was provided to your office, by whom, and what independent verification steps your firm undertook." The pause that followed was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. "Of course," Gordon Callaway said. "I'll have Davis pull the file." What Davis pulled 40 minutes later told a story I had suspected but had not yet been able to prove. Callaway and Reed had begun probate proceedings in August, 1 month after Herbert's death. The firm had requested beneficiary contact information from the estate's informal contact, the individual who had initially brought Herbert's passing to their attention and provided preliminary family information. That individual had submitted contact details in writing. The name on the submission form was Deborah Chase. Deborah had provided my old Beaverton address. She had also, and this was the detail that made Patricia's pen go very still on her legal pad, noted in writing that she was the primary family liaison and that she would ensure Sarah Mitchell was contacted through family channels. She'd never contacted me, not once. The certified letters had gone to a house where I had not lived for 11 years. The statutory notification period had run. When I had not responded, Callaway and Reed had, correctly, technically, proceeded under the assumption that their notification efforts had been made in good faith. Deborah had made herself the gatekeeper, and then she had closed the gate. Patricia requested certified copies of everything. Gordon Callaway provided them without argument, and I noticed he chose his words with a new, careful precision, the precision of a man who had begun to calculate what his firm's exposure might be for relying on a single, unverified family source without conducting additional due diligence. We left at noon. In the elevator, Patricia turned to me. "That submission form is your evidence," she said. "It establishes that Deborah Shays provided false contact information, represented herself as family liaison, and made a specific written promise to notify you that she did not keep. That is the foundation of a probate fraud claim." "What does that mean for her?" I asked. "It means she may have committed a crime," Patricia said simply. "Depending on what we find next, it could mean civil liability, criminal referral, or both." I thought about Deborah's kitchen renovation. Her voice on the phone 18 months ago, smooth and careful. "Neither have I, Sarah. I haven't heard from any of them either." I walked out of that building into the pale March sunlight, and I knew, with absolute bone-deep certainty, that this was not going to end quietly. It was also, I realized around this time, that Deborah's calls began. 2 missed calls that evening, no voicemails. She knew something had shifted. The plan Patricia and I had agreed on was methodical. We were not going to move fast. We were going to move correctly. First, a formal complaint to the Oregon State Bar regarding Callaway and Reed's reliance on a single unverified source for beneficiary contact. Not to destroy the firm, they had been deceived too in all likelihood, but to create an official record and apply institutional pressure that would compel their full cooperation. Second, a civil action against Deborah Shays for probate fraud and intentional interference with inheritance rights. Patricia had already researched Oregon case law on third-party interference with estate proceedings. The precedents were clear, and for Deborah, not encouraging. Third, a referral package to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. Patricia was careful to explain that whether the DA pursued it was not in our control, but that the documentation we had, the submission form, the written promise to notify, the deliberately outdated address, was compelling enough to warrant the referral. I signed the documents in Patricia's office on a Wednesday afternoon. Lily was at soccer practice. I had arranged for Megan to pick her up if I ran late. I drove home feeling something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but a kind of solidness, like I had placed my feet on ground that would hold. The solidness lasted approximately 36 hours. On Friday evening, I was grading papers at the kitchen table. Still grading, still teaching, still showing up at 7:45 every morning because that was who I was. When headlights swept across the front window, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. Then I recognized it, a silver Mercedes, Craig's car. I sat very still for a moment. Then I went to the front door and opened it before they could knock. Deborah looked the way she always looked, expensive and slightly too much of everything. Too much jewelry, too much perfume, too much smile. But tonight the smile was doing extra work. Craig stood half a step behind her, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, that assessing gaze moving across my face before settling somewhere just past my shoulder, cataloging the interior of my house. "Sarah," Deborah said, "I'm so glad you're home. We were in the neighborhood and we thought, it's been so long. Can we come in?" "No," I said. The smile flickered. "Excuse me?" "You're not coming in, Deb." I kept my voice level. "If you'd like to speak to me, you can contact my attorney." Craig moved, not forward, sideways, just slightly, in a way that repositioned him in my peripheral vision. It was a small, practiced movement, and it made my stomach tighten. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," he said. His voice was calm, reasonable. The voice of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. "There's clearly been some miscommunication about the estate. We just want to have a conversation, family to family." "There was no miscommunication," I said. Deborah's expression shifted. The warmth drained out of it so cleanly and so fast that it was almost impressive. What replaced it was something flat and precise. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing," she said. "You're about to make accusations against your own family. Do you understand what that does? To you, to Lily, how that looks?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "You have no idea what you're getting into." She stepped forward half an inch, enough to mean something. "Herbert was not the man you think he was. There are things about your father's side of this family that you don't know. Things that could complicate your claim considerably. Things that, if they came out, would make a lot of people question whether you deserve any of this at all." I looked at her for a long moment. She held my gaze. Behind her, Craig had gone perfectly still. "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I'm warning you," she said. "There's a difference." "Then consider me warned," I said. "Good night, Deborah." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway with my back against it, listening to the silence after their footsteps on the porch, the car doors closing, the engine starting, the crunch of gravel as they backed out. I waited until the headlights had swept the window again and disappeared. Then I went to the kitchen and called Patricia. I described every word of the exchange. She listened without interrupting. "Did she say what these things were?" Patricia asked. "No." Then she doesn't have anything, Patricia said firmly. If she had documentation of something material, she would have led with it, not hinted at it. This is a pressure tactic. She wanted you frightened enough to back down before the complaint reaches the DA's office. A pause. Did you feel frightened? Yes, I admitted. Good, Patricia said. That's appropriate. She's not a harmless person, but frightened and paralyzed are different things. You don't have to be the second one. After I hung up, I sat on the couch for a long time. Lily was upstairs doing homework, music playing faintly through her door. This house, this small, imperfect, entirely ours house, suddenly felt very fragile. Not because it was, because Deborah had intended it to feel that way. I gave myself the weekend, not to doubt, not to reconsider, but to breathe. I took Lily to the farmer's market on Saturday. I bought tulips. I let myself eat a cinnamon roll without calculating anything. I watched a movie with Lily on Sunday evening, her feet in my lap, and I laughed at the parts that were funny and didn't think about the silver Mercedes or the flat, cold look on my cousin's face. By Monday morning, the fear had not disappeared, but it had changed its shape. It had become fuel. The offer came through an intermediary, not Deborah herself, which I thought was telling. A man named Fletcher Webb contacted Patricia's office identifying himself as a representative retained by a party with an interest in the Mitchell estate. He requested a meeting. Patricia agreed with conditions. Everything in writing she would attend, and nothing discussed at the meeting would constitute a binding agreement. We met him at a conference room in a neutral building downtown, one of those anonymous spaces that law firms rent by the hour for exactly these kinds of conversations. Fletcher Webb was about 45, compact and precise, with the manner of someone who had made his career facilitating outcomes that no one wanted to fully claim. He placed a folder on the table. "My clients," he said, "recognize that the situation has become unnecessarily adversarial. They'd like to propose a resolution that serves everyone's interests." I kept my hands folded on the table and said nothing. He opened the folder. A settlement of $8 million, transferred within 30 days of the signing of a full mutual release. All claims on both sides, withdrawn. No admission of wrongdoing, complete confidentiality. $8 million. I want to be honest. The number registered. Of course it did. I was a woman who checked price tags. $8 million was more money than I could have spent in a careful lifetime. It was college for Lily, the leaky faucet fixed. 10,000 leaky faucets fixed. It was a different life entirely. I looked at the folder. I looked at Fletcher Webb's careful, neutral face. I thought about that submission form, sitting in Patricia's files, Deborah's handwriting, her promise, her deliberate erasure of me from my own inheritance. I thought about Herbert's message. "I should have found you sooner. I'm sorry it took me so long." What had he wanted me to have? Not 8 million of the 115. All of it. He had chosen me specifically, carefully, for reasons I was still learning. To accept 8 million and sign a confidentiality agreement would not just be accepting less than what was mine. It would be agreeing to be quiet about what had been done. It would be letting the people who had erased me walk away intact. "No," I said. Fletcher Webb looked at me. "Ms. Mitchell, I'd encourage you to—" "No," I said again, and there was nothing in my voice except the word itself. No anger, no apology, no waver. Just the word, flat and final like a door closing. Patricia gathered her papers. We stood. "If your clients would like to discuss cooperation with the DA's referral," Patricia said pleasantly, "they're welcome to reach out." We left him sitting there with his folder. In the elevator, Patricia said, "You understand that number will not go up from here. Once the civil complaint is filed formally, settlement calculus changes." "I understand," I said. "You're certain?" "I'm certain." She nodded once. That was all. I had not yet told Megan any of this. She was my best friend, and I had been carrying it alone for 3 weeks, and the weight of it had become something I wore every day without realizing how much it had changed my posture, my sleep, the way I moved through rooms. I called her that Thursday evening. I told her everything, from the bank balance to the farmer's market to Fletcher Webb's folder on the table. She let me talk. She did not interrupt. She did not gasp in the places I expected her to gasp, which was both strange and exactly right. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Okay," Megan said. "First question, do you need money right now? Like practically, can you cover your bills while this is all tied up in legal proceedings?" I laughed. I hadn't laughed in 3 weeks. It came out slightly ragged. "Yes," I said. "The funds aren't frozen. They're in my account. I haven't touched them. I'm almost scared to." "You should buy new towels," she said seriously. "Yours are terrible." "I've seen them." "Megan." "I'm being practical. Second question, is Lily safe? Does Deborah know where Lily goes to school?" That one hit me somewhere cold. "I don't think she does." "Okay. I'm not trying to alarm you. I work in an ER. I think about logistics. You should probably think about that." "I will." Third question, what do you need from me? I thought about it. What did I need? "I need someone to know," I said. "I need someone other than my attorney to know the truth of what happened and to say that I'm not crazy for fighting it." "You are absolutely not crazy," Megan said. "Deborah Shays stole 8 months of your life and all of your uncle's intentions. You have every right to hold her accountable. Every right." A pause. "And Sarah? Herbert picked you for a reason. Don't let her make you forget that." I cried after I hung up. Not the panicked, helpless kind of crying. The other kind. The kind that means something has been released, that you are not as alone as you thought you were, that the ground is still there. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. They came on a Sunday afternoon, which I think was deliberate. Sundays are soft. People are in their pajamas, mentally displaced from their work week selves, more open to sentiment, to family, to the idea that things could be simpler than they are. Sundays are when you miss people, when you think, maybe I was wrong, maybe this can be fixed. Lily was at a friend's house. I was alone. The knock was gentle this time. No car in the driveway. They must have parked on the street. When I looked through the window, I saw Deborah standing on my porch with a paper bag that smelled, even through the glass, like the pastries from the French bakery on Burnside. In her other hand, a small bunch of peonies. I opened the door. "I know you don't want to see me," Deborah said, and her voice was soft in a way I hadn't heard in years, in the way it had sometimes been when we were young, before everything calcified into competition. "I know I've made mistakes. I needed to try. Can I come in? Just for a few minutes?" Craig was not there. That was different. That was, I realized, intended to be disarming. I stepped back. I let her in. She set the pastries on the kitchen table. She laid the peonies on the counter. She looked around my kitchen with an expression I couldn't immediately read, something between wistfulness and assessment. "I missed you," she said. "I know that probably sounds insane to you right now, but I genuinely did." "Sit down, Deb," I said. I remained standing. She sat. She folded her hands on the table. She looked up at me. "Herbert was not easy," she said. "He was a difficult man, secretive. He had his favorites and he never explained why, and the rest of us just had to accommodate that. A pause. Your father was his favorite, always. And then when your father died, that favoritism shifted to you. And I thought if I just managed things carefully, maybe there was a way to make sure the family as a whole benefited, not just one person. You intercepted my mail, I said. I redirected the process, she said, to give time for a different arrangement. Craig has contacts in estate law. We thought, you thought you could redirect $115 million, I said flatly. To yourselves, to the family, she said. Deborah, I said, you are not my family. You made that choice when you sat down and wrote your address on a form with my name on it. The softness left her face. It left the same way it had at my front door 3 weeks ago, cleanly, completely, like a switch. You're making a mistake, she said. I came here today because I still thought there was a chance to resolve this between us, but you want to humiliate us. You want to drag this through courts, through the newspapers. You want everyone to see. I want the truth to be documented, I said. That's all. The truth. She said it with something like contempt. Here's the truth, Sarah. Herbert was senile. He wasn't of sound mind when he wrote that will, and we have documentation that supports that. Our attorney has an affidavit from his primary care physician suggesting cognitive impairment in the last year of his life. If we file that, this whole estate goes into contest. It could be tied up for years. Lily would be heading to college before you see $1. I felt it. The specific cold that comes not from fear of losing, but from realizing how far someone is willing to go. I looked at my cousin. I thought about Herbert's letter. I should have found you sooner. Everything I had was always meant for you. Was that the voice of a man with cognitive impairment? Or the voice of a man who had spent the last years of his life regretting that he hadn't done more, sooner? That affidavit, I said carefully, would need to be authentic. It would need to come from a physician who genuinely examined Herbert and documented that specific diagnosis. Any attempt to manufacture or influence such documentation would be criminal. Do you understand that? Deborah's jaw tightened. File what you have, I said. Put it in front of a judge. We'll respond. That's what courts are for. She stood up. The peonies were still on the counter. She didn't take them. You think you're being brave, she said. You're not brave. You're just too stubborn to take the exit when it's offered. Goodbye, Deborah. She left. The door closed behind her with more force than necessary. I stood in my kitchen and breathed. I noticed my hands were trembling very slightly, not from weakness, from adrenaline, from the effort of keeping my voice flat and my expression neutral while something inside me had been screaming. I thought about the affidavit. A physician's affidavit claiming cognitive impairment. If such a document existed, if Deborah genuinely had it, why hadn't Fletcher Webb produced it at the settlement meeting? Why hadn't it appeared in the materials Calloway and Reed had shared? You don't sit on an ace like that. You play it, which meant it probably didn't exist yet, which meant she was still constructing her threats as she went. I called Patricia. She implied they have a physician's affidavit suggesting testamentary incapacity, I said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Did she name the physician? No. Did she produce documentation? No, verbal only. Then it's likely a bluff, or something they're in the process of manufacturing. I'll file for full medical record disclosure through the estate proceedings. If there's an authentic diagnosis on record, we'll see it. If the document they produce doesn't align with the clinical record, that's evidence of fabrication. Fabricating medical documentation in estate litigation is a felony. A felony. The word landed in my quiet kitchen like something with weight. Is she going to keep escalating? I asked. Yes, Patricia said without hesitation. But people who escalate in the way she's escalating are usually people who are losing. Confident people negotiate. Desperate people threaten. I looked at the peonies on my counter. Pink, dense, closed into tight fists. I put them in a glass of water. They were good flowers. I was not going to waste them because of who had brought them. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in May, 10 weeks after I had first called the bank and heard Richard Holt's voice drop to something private and careful. The Multnomah County Courthouse on Fifth Avenue had the particular quality of important places that have seen too much drama to be impressed by any individual crisis. Stone floors, fluorescent light, the smell of recycled air and old paper. I arrived with Patricia 40 minutes early. I wore the navy blazer again. It had become, without my consciously deciding it, my armor. Deborah and Craig arrived with 2 attorneys, a senior partner named Goldstein and a younger associate I didn't know. Deborah was dressed immaculately. Craig's tie was the same blue as a corporate logo. They looked like people who were accustomed to winning, but Craig's eye contact was slightly too deliberate. And Deborah's smile when she saw me was the smile of someone manufacturing composure in real time. The proceeding was a probate hearing before Judge Arlene Watts, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and the contained energy of someone who had run out of patience for amateur theatrics decades ago. Patricia laid our case in order. The submission form with Deborah's handwriting, the outdated address, the written promise to notify, the missed notification window, the civil complaint we had filed 6 weeks prior. She presented it the way she did everything, without drama, without editorializing, as a sequence of documented facts that collectively told a story. Goldstein presented Deborah's counterposition, that her client had acted in good faith, providing contact information she believed to be current, that the address on file was the most recent she had for Ms. Mitchell, that she had indeed intended to make personal contact but had been unable to do so due to circumstances she would describe as a family estrangement. Judge Watts looked at Deborah over her reading glasses. "Ms. Chase," she said, "you submitted a written document to Callaway and Reed in which you represented yourself as the family liaison and specified that you would ensure the beneficiary was notified through family channels. Is that accurate?" Yes, that's accurate, Deborah said. But I want to clarify. Did you notify the beneficiary through any channel? I attempted. Through any channel, Judge Watts repeated. Silence. No, Deborah said. You also, Judge Watts continued, glancing at her papers, have represented to this court through your filing that you believe the address you provided to be current. Can you tell me how you obtained that address and when you last verified it? Goldstein leaned in and murmured something to Deborah. She shook her head slightly. It was the address I had on file, she said. Ms. Chase. Ms. Mitchell moved from that address in 2014. She filed a postal change of address notification at that time. She's lived at her current address for 11 years. Is it your testimony that in 11 years you had no interaction with your cousin that would have informed you of her current residence? Another silence, this one longer. We were not in close contact, Deborah said. You called her, Patricia said quietly from my side of the table. She slid a document across to Judge Watts's clerk, phone records she had subpoenaed 3 weeks prior. Twice in July of last year, after Herbert Mitchell's death, your client made 2 calls to Ms. Mitchell's cell phone, calls that went unanswered. Those calls were made from a phone registered to Deborah Chase. Judge Watts looked at the records. She looked at Deborah. "You had her number," the judge said, "and yet the address you provided was 11 years out of date." Deborah looked at Craig. For just a moment, one fraction of a second, her composure fractured. It was the kind of fracture you only catch if you're watching very closely, and I was watching very closely. I had been watching her my entire life. Craig's jaw tightened. He leaned forward. "Your Honor, I'd like to address Mr. Shays," Judge Watts said without looking up from the documents. "You are not a party of record in this proceeding. Please allow your counsel to speak." Goldstein cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my clients are prepared to acknowledge that the notification process was imperfect and to explore a negotiated resolution." "Mr. Goldstein," Patricia said pleasantly, "your clients had the opportunity for a negotiated resolution. They declined it." She paused. "We did not. They made an offer of $8 million. My client declined it. Subsequently, the defendant's representative made an informal allegation of testamentary incapacity and referenced a physician's affidavit. She slid another document across to the clerk. "We subpoenaed Herbert Mitchell's complete medical record. His primary care physician, Dr. Ruth Nakamura, has submitted a declaration confirming that Mr. Mitchell underwent cognitive screening in December of the year prior to his death at his own request and was found to be fully cognitively intact. There is no diagnosis of dementia, no cognitive impairment, no clinical basis for a testamentary incapacity claim. Dr. Nakamura's declaration also states that she was recently contacted by telephone in March of this year by an individual identifying themselves as Herbert Mitchell's family representative, requesting a statement regarding his mental capacity. She declined and subsequently reported the contact to her professional liability insurer." The room went very quiet. Craig's face was the color of something left too long in a closed room. "Your Honor," Goldstein said, and even his voice had lost some of its structure, we'd need time to—" "I'm sure you would," Judge Watts said. She set down her reading glasses and looked at the table with the clear, unimpressed gaze of a woman who had seen this specific flavor of desperation before. "Let me tell you what I'm seeing, counsel. I'm seeing documented evidence that the respondent provided false contact information to the estate's attorneys, made a written promise she did not keep, had access to current contact information for the beneficiary at the time of the estate proceedings, and subsequently attempted to engage a treating physician in providing a statement that said physician has described as a solicitation she reported to her insurer. She let that settle. I don't need more time to form an opinion about the nature of these actions," Deborah said in a voice I barely recognized, stripped of performance, genuinely frightened for the first time. "We were just trying to protect the family's interests." Judge Watts looked at her. "Ms. Chase," she said, "the family whose interests this estate was designed to protect is sitting across the table from you." Judge Watts issued her ruling 11 days after the hearing. I read it at Patricia's desk in that office with the cedar smell and the view of the Willamette. The ruling confirmed Sarah Ann Mitchell as the sole legitimate beneficiary of the estate of Herbert Allen Mitchell, and found that Deborah Louise Shays had engaged in deliberate interference with probate proceedings through the provision of knowingly false contact information and the breach of a written undertaking to notify the beneficiary. The estate's funds, $115,347,000 plus accrued interest, were confirmed as fully vested in my name. The civil judgment against Deborah was substantial, $4.2 million in damages, covering legal fees, documented losses, and a punitive award her attorneys had argued strenuously against. Judge Watts had not been moved. The DA's referral moved more slowly, the way criminal matters do, but it moved. By late June, Deborah and Craig were each facing charges of probate fraud and conspiracy. The attempted solicitation of Dr. Nakamura had added a charge of attempted procurement of a false statement in a legal proceeding. A felony, as Patricia had always said it would be. The thing about a complete legal victory is that it doesn't feel the way you imagine. There's no single moment of triumph, no fanfare. It accumulates quietly, in pieces, an email from Patricia, a signed document, a balance on a screen that is undisputably, legally, permanently yours. I went to Herbert's grave, Lake Oswego Cemetery, a quiet section under old oaks. His stone was simple: Herbert Allen Mitchell, civil engineer, lover of the Willamette Valley. I stood there for a while. I thought about the man who had watched me at my father's funeral, quietly from across a room, and had apparently been thinking about me ever since. "I found it," I said to the stone. I felt slightly foolish and did it anyway. I found it, and I didn't sign it away. The kitchen faucet had been fixed by a plumber I'd finally called. $200, paid without checking my account balance first. The complete absence of calculation, the simple paying of a bill without consequence, had been so unfamiliar I'd had to sit down. I was going to have to learn new habits. That was fine. Lily didn't know the full details of the proceedings. I had told her one evening in April that Herbert, a great uncle she'd never known, had left us some money, and that we'd had some disagreements with family about it, and that it was handled. She'd looked at me with 14-year-old precision and said, "Is it a lot of money?" I said yes. She said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said yes. She went back to her homework. That was the right order of priorities. Are we going to be okay? Yes. A year and a half later, my life looked like this, still teaching. 3 days a week now, by choice. A craftsman house in Ladd's Addition with a real garden and counter space in the kitchen. All the faucets worked. I checked. A college fund for Lily. A quiet scholarship at Roosevelt named for nobody. No announcements, just choices, made carefully. In August, Lily and I drove the coast. Bad clam chowder with too much cream. We complained. We ordered seconds. Deborah. Convicted of probate fraud, 18 months minimum security. Craig pleaded guilty to conspiracy. The Lake Oswego house went to auction. Everything they'd built had been leveraged against an inheritance that was never theirs. I stopped following the details. She had occupied enough of my attention. In Herbert's papers, Patricia found a letter he'd never sent. He described the estate as an act of correction. Not charity, correction. I had it framed. It hung near the kitchen window where Lily's sunflowers grew in a long yellow line through the summer.